The gas station on the edge of nowhere, off Route 19, was the kind of place people drove past without noticing. Jared didn't mind it. For him, it was just part-time work, a paycheck, and a quiet place to work. He took the night shift because no one else wanted it. No customers, no boss breathing down his neck, just 10 hours of silence and the slow buzz of a dying ceiling fan. It was November 3rd, a Wednesday, cloudy, cold. Jared arrived at 11:56 p.m. and unlocked the back door like he always did. The timestamp from the surveillance camera showed everything as routine. Keys in, door opens, Jared walks in. Normal. The store lights flickered on one by one. He threw his bag behind the counter, poured himself a cup of stale coffee, and started scrolling through his phone. He looked tired. His posture slouched a little more than usual. Around 12:10 a.m., he walked into the cooler room to restock the energy drinks. Security footage captured him carefully placing cans on the shelf. At 12:14 a.m., he froze. No noise, no sudden crash. He just stopped. One can of Monster still in his hand, arm hovering midair. He turned his head, just slightly, to the far back corner of the store, toward a blank, undecorated wall. He stared for several seconds, unmoving. Then very slowly he stepped back. One foot, then the other, still staring. Then he turned and walked off screen. That was the last time anyone saw Jared. He never walked out the front door. No one came in. No alarms were triggered. No windows were broken. And yet, when the morning clerk arrived at 7:03 a.m., the place was empty. Jared's coffee was cold. His phone, wallet, and keys were behind the counter. His car was in the lot, locked. Police were called. There were no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints beyond Jared's. The back door was still bolted shut from the inside. It was as if he had simply evaporated. They reviewed every second of footage, again and again. Always the same. Jared looks, Jared walks off screen, and then nothing. The only oddity? At 12:21 a.m., the cameras glitched. For exactly 7 minutes, the entire feed, every angle, froze. Not static, not error, just a still image. The lights were on, the fridge was closed. However, the shadows didn't match the overhead lighting. The tiles on the floor looked cracked, almost rotten. A faint reflection in the glass cooler door showed something that didn't belong. The outline of a figure standing in the middle of the store. Too tall, too thin, with shoulders that taper unnaturally into a long, narrow neck. Unmoving. No facial features. Like something wearing a person. It was staring at the camera. The frame stayed that way until 12:28 a.m., when the feed resumed like nothing happened. The case closed within a month. Since then, 3 more employees have worked the night shift at that gas station. Each one quit within weeks. One left mid-shift and never returned for his last paycheck. When asked why, he simply said, "Sometimes the shadows move when they shouldn't." Marissa lived alone in a 2-story rental in a quiet neighborhood. She had no enemies, no recent trauma, no history of mental illness. She worked from home, owned a ginger cat named Milo, and liked true crime podcasts. Her life was uneventful until the night she vanished. It started with a 911 call at 3:07 a.m. The dispatcher logged it as distressed female. The transcript was brief. "Hello? Please, someone's following me. I don't know how they got in. I'm locked in the bathroom. I think..." The line disconnects. standard call-out. 2 patrol cars were dispatched, Marissa's front door locked, windows shut. No signs of forced entry. The officers knocked. No answer. When they broke in, they found the place in perfect order. Milo was asleep on the sofa. Marissa's phone was inside her purse by the couch. Her bed was made. Nothing was out of place. Except for the bathroom. Inside, the mirror had been wiped clean in the center. The rest of the surface was fogged, as though recently steamed. A single handprint was pressed into the condensation. High up. Too high for someone of Marissa's height, and spread wide, unnaturally wide, like the fingers had been pulled apart at the tendons. There was no other evidence. The call had definitely come from Marissa's phone. But the timeline didn't make sense. Data log showed her phone had been inactive since 11:42 p.m., almost 4 hours before the 911 call was placed. It hadn't moved, no battery drain, no Wi-Fi activity. Yet somehow the call came through it. Her family was notified. Her sister Emily came over to help pack some of her things. The cat had to be rehomed. The case went cold due to lack of leads. Then, exactly 2 weeks later, Emily received a phone call. No caller ID, just a faint rustling, then Marissa's voice. Flat, whispering, like she was speaking through a crack in a wall. "I'm still here, but it's not my house anymore." When Emily screamed her name, the line went dead. The number was traced to a decommissioned cell tower 30 miles north, located in an abandoned mental hospital slated for demolition. Power had been disconnected for over a decade, and yet, just minutes before the call, something had activated a motion sensor inside the building. Investigators searched the property. Nothing, except for one room on the second floor, sealed shut with a rusted chain. Inside was a bathroom. The mirror had been recently cleaned, except for a large handprint. Just like before. There was no record of how Marissa would have gotten there. Yet, every few months, the same thing happened. A phone call, always from a blocked number, always in her voice. She never asks for help. She never says where she is. She just whispers things like, "He's watching through the mirror. Don't turn the lights off in the bathroom." They said, "If I make noise, I stay longer." The last call came in at 2:39 a.m., 1 year to the day after she disappeared. The voice was different this time. Slower. Hollow. Not quite human. It's not Marissa anymore. Police no longer pursue the case. The house has since been rented again. The new tenants say sometimes when they step out of the shower the mirror is clean, except for a single handprint, pressed high up in the mirror. James and Victor had been best friends since childhood. Every summer for the past 10 years, they hiked the same trail along the cliffside, a winding path carved into the mountain's edge, overlooking a vast valley below. It was their tradition, their escape, their unspoken bond. The morning of July 14th was clear but crisp. Birds chirped in the distance, and the sun was just beginning to warm the jagged rocks. James and Victor laughed and joked as they climbed higher, the sound of their voices blending with the rustle of wind through the trees. Halfway up the trail, James spotted something. A small rock outcrop jutting farther than usual over the valley. It looked like the perfect place to catch a panoramic view. He turned to Victor and said, "Wait here. I'm going to check the view out." Victor nodded. James moved forward, careful with each step, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. As James reached the edge, he stepped onto the outcrop, and then he vanished. Victor's heart stopped. One moment, James was there, balancing on the ledge, and the next, he was gone. No stumble, no fall, no scream, just nothing. Victor ran forward, eyes wide, scanning the flat stone. There was no cliff beneath. The drop was sheer but visible. No loose soil, no sign of movement. The rock was solid and unbroken. "James!" Victor called desperately, his voice breaking, but there was no answer. Search parties were organized, helicopters scoured the area, and dogs combed every inch of the mountain. Days turned into weeks. There was no trace of James, no footprints beyond the outcrop, no discarded belongings, no sign of disturbance. Then Victor began receiving messages on his phone. Unknown numbers, no text, only photos. Each one was of the rock outcrop, same time of day, same weather, same angle. But in the latest photo there was a figure, a man, standing with his back to the camera. But the figure wasn't looking toward the valley. He was staring directly at the cliff wall. Victor's hands trembled as he stared at the photo, frozen in horror. He knew that figure. It was James. Weeks later, Victor returned to the outcrop alone. He stood where James had vanished, heart pounding. The wind whispered around him. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shifted. A faint crack echoed through the silence. And then, a soft voice, almost too faint to hear, "Help me." Victor spun around, but there was no one there. Only the endless void beneath the cliff. James was never found, and Victor never returned to that trail again. But sometimes hikers swear they hear whispers carried by the wind, begging for help from the rock itself. Voices of those who took the last step and disappeared into nothingness. Ethan was turning 18. He wasn't one for big celebrations, mostly quiet, a little reserved, and spent most of his time online. Since the pandemic had pushed everyone indoors, he'd gotten used to spending his birthday alone, connected only through screens. This year, he decided to mark the occasion by live streaming. Nothing fancy, just his small apartment, a modest cake, and a few close friends dropping in through chat. The camera was set up in a corner, catching the little room in soft lighting. As midnight struck, Ethan smiled and carefully lit the candles on his cake. The flickering flames reflected in his eyes as he looked into the camera and blew them out, quietly wishing for something he wouldn't say aloud. His friends in chat cheered, sending emojis and birthday wishes. The moment felt simple, normal, safe. But then, just seconds later, the video froze. Not the usual glitch or lag, the screen locked on a frame showing Ethan mid-blow, his mouth slightly open, eyes wide like he'd just seen something behind the camera. The chat filled with concerned messages. "Ethan? You okay? Is everything all right? Why isn't the stream moving?" Minutes passed with no response. Some viewers began to notice something unsettling in the background. A shadow, subtle and shifting behind Ethan, barely visible, but definitely there. It moved slowly, almost deliberately, just outside the camera's main focus. One person typed, "Did anyone else see that?" Something's behind him. Others zoomed in on the feed, trying to get a clearer view. The shadow wasn't quite human. It didn't fully cross the frame, but it lingered, as if watching. Hours later, the stream abruptly ended. No goodbye, no explanation. Ethan's phone remained logged into the streaming platform, but all attempts to reach him went unanswered. His parents were away for the weekend, unreachable. His apartment was silent. The next morning, a neighbor noticed Ethan's door was slightly ajar. Inside, everything seemed untouched. The birthday cake was still on the table, the candles melted and cold. Ethan's laptop sat on his desk, the screen cracked, webcam shattered. No sign of a struggle, no note, no indication of where he might have gone. What unsettled everyone most was the angle of the camera. It was positioned facing a corner of the room, but behind Ethan, a mirror hung on the wall, reflecting the other half of the apartment. During the frozen frame, if you looked closely at the mirror's reflection, a vague, blurred figure seemed to flicker just behind Ethan's shoulder. A shape that wasn't quite right, moving in a way no human should. Days passed. Friends kept logging into Ethan's channel, hoping for a new stream. There was nothing. No new videos, no updates, no sign of him anywhere. And somewhere in the building, just beyond the range of any camera, faint tapping began. A slow, rhythmic tapping on the walls, like fingers drumming. Waiting for Ethan to come back. But he never did. Laura had just moved into an old apartment building on the quiet edge of town. The kind of place where the paint peeled, the wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the thin walls whispered secrets you wished you didn't hear. Apartment 3B had been vacant for months, the landlord said. It needed repairs. But ever since Laura moved in next door, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At night, strange noises came through the walls, faint scraping, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing just behind the plaster. At first, she blamed the building's age, the pipes, the wind, the settling foundation. But the noises grew worse. One evening, after returning from work, Laura found her door slightly ajar. Her heart hammered as she pushed it open. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, except near the window lay a patch of dirt, as if freshly disturbed. Scattered in the dirt were tiny bare footprints, too small to be human. They led directly to the wall next to her bed, then stopped. Laura pressed her ear against the cold plaster. A faint scratching started, like nails tapping slowly from within. A cold draft crept through the cracks in the wall, chilling her despite the heater running. The next day, Laura's friends noticed she was withdrawing. She spoke little about the noises, but late at night her phone recorded strange audio, just static and faint scraping. One morning, Laura failed to show up for work. Her phone went unanswered. Her apartment door was locked from the inside. Friends grew worried and called the landlord. When police arrived, they found the apartment exactly as Laura left it. Lights on, belongings untouched, no sign of forced entry or struggle. But there was one thing no one could explain. A section of the wall near her bed, the one with the tiny footprints, sounded hollow when tapped. A search of the building followed. During renovations to fix a long-neglected plumbing issue, workers tore into the wall. Behind the plaster was a narrow crawl space, barely big enough to squeeze into. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. The walls were carved with desperate scratch marks. On the dirt floor lay torn pieces of fabric, matching the color of Laura's clothes. But Laura was nowhere to be found. After that, tenants swore they could hear pacing footsteps behind the walls. A slow tapping, like someone trapped, trying to find a way out. And sometimes, in the dead of night, they heard faint whispers just beyond the plaster. Laura vanished without a trace. And behind the walls of apartment 3B, something waits, waiting for the next silent neighbor. Thank you for watching and listening. See you soon with more stories. Till then, stay well and stay safe.